Well, welcome everyone. I'm Dale Peterson, founder and program chair of S4 Events. And we're here today to do the reveal of the S4 Proof of Concept Pavilion provider who's going to bring the system down and to show you an overview of the architecture and the system that vendors will be installing their systems on. Now, I know we did another video on this, but let me give you the short version of what the Proof of Concept Pavilion is going to be, the POC Pavilion. We see at a lot of events, big exhibit spaces where the vendors come in and they bring down their systems and they've got canned demos. You never know what's actually happening behind the scenes. There could be nothing there. Obviously, in their own interest, they're creating demos that they know work, that they know make their product look good. And I think that's very useful from an educational standpoint. What does the system do? But you really don't know if the system works. And you don't know if it'll work on a variety of systems because they pick the most ideal circumstances for their demo. So what we've done in the Proof of Concept Pavilion, our idea here is to actually bring down an OT system and mimic as closely as possible a proof of concept installation. We begin in selecting the vendors, and you might have seen my article today. We asked really just two questions. What problem does your product or service solve? And surprisingly enough, if you look at my article, not a lot of vendors are very good at answering that question. You very quickly get into jargon and such. But what problem does your solution solve? And we want to have a variety of different types of products that we don't want, for example, 8 remote access solutions or 8 asset inventory solutions. So we're going to have a variety, but we're going to have 8 vendors there installing their solution, solving a problem in the Proof of Concept Pavilion. And they will be showing this in their exhibit area. And it will have a small stage in there, and they will have to do a live demo showing it work, hopefully. We would like to think they'll all succeed, but if it doesn't work, you'll see that as well. And we'll have an expert asking questions, and then the audience will have a chance to ask questions. Can you show me this? Does your product do this? Can you show it to me? So it'll be very much like a proof of concept in that way. We have selected 3 of the 8 that will be in the pavilion. I hope to be able to announce them today, but we're still finalizing the contracts with them. So we still have 5 of 8 slots remaining. So one of the things that you could do if you're watching here is I'd be very interested in what problems you would like to see solutions solve in the POC Pavilion. Or you could even say, I would like to see this vendor in the POC Pavilion. I would like to see their product. Now, if you're with a product company, don't put your own product in there. If you are, you should probably just go to your team and say, hey, why aren't we in the pavilion? Let's get in there. Because we are still accepting applications, and we're going to get much more aggressive in trying to fill out the other 5. We've kind of held back till we got the system identified and we could reveal it, which is what we're doing today. So we've got 3 of the 8. We're looking for 5 more. When we were looking at this, so one of the key things is we were going to need a highly realistic OT system for people to deploy. There are a number of people that do that. We looked first at the ITS Village because they've done some of the other pavilions in the past. They've been great. I don't have a single bad thing to say about them. They are really fantastic. The issue why we didn't use their system is really more geared to showing a lot of different products and a lot of capabilities. And in fact, has a fair amount of security integrated in it as well. We wanted this to be a small but very complete and realistic system like you would see when you do a proof of concept. So we looked at those. So we looked at a variety of vendors. We had a number of interviews, and we ended up selecting Booz Allen to be the pavilion provider. So they will be the company that's bringing down the OT system. They will be the company that will provide the information package, just like you would get in a proof of concept. They would be the ones answering questions from the vendors, just like you would in a proof of concept. And now, Liz, if you could, joining us now from Booz Allen is Kyle Miller, who is kind of the point man for this POC Pavilion. Welcome to the show, Kyle.
Great. Thank you, Dale. Happy to be here.
Well, we got this is the reveal, but before you reveal exactly the exact system we're going to use, why does Booz Allen have these systems available? What do you use them for? Because I was very pleasantly surprised that we weren't going to have to find someone who could build this up. That probably 90% of what we needed already existed. Why does Booz Allen have these systems?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've got a number of OT labs around the U.S. The one that I think we joined you in for the initial call was one that's close to where I live in Virginia, and I would say we use them for maybe three main reasons. One is R&D and innovation. So we use them as a test bed to test new products that we see on the market, evaluate new tools, build out new capabilities for ourselves and for our clients. We also use them a lot to train staff. So it's hard to hire good OT cyber professionals. So sometimes we have to train folks up on all the different OT environments, OT tools and technologies. And last, we use them for client delivery. So we have a number of different vignettes stood up that represent all different types of industries so that we can use them while we're building new capabilities for clients.
And each one of these typically, since they're realistic, they represent a system you would find in a sector. And we looked at a number of the ones that were available, and we didn't necessarily want to model an entire facility because you often wouldn't do a proof of concept on everything. You would do it on just part of it. So the one that we selected, and let me kind of put it up here. Let me go back. The one that we selected was a system that was mimicking an auto factory. So it's in the automotive sector. And I'm not going to stay on this chart for very long because it's kind of an eye test. But what I wanted to show here, and we'll split this in two, is the system goes all the way from the cloud down to level 0. So it is a complete system. It's not just level 0 through 2. It's got, level 3. It's got MEES. It's got a variety of other components in it, which really appeal to us. But let's zoom in now. We'll go to level 0 through 2. So we see here that this is mimicking two parts of an auto manufacturing plant. There is an assembly zone that is based on Rockwell primarily, and then a paint shop that's based on Siemens. But even in this, if I'm correct, Kyle, the assembly zone isn't assembling an entire car. It's like a line that you would see in a plant. You might have many assembly lines in a plant. Is that accurate?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, this is just a single line, and this is just the final assembly part of the process.
Oh, so the final assembly. That was going to be my next question. But it is multiple steps. It's not just managing one machine or one subset. It's actually, if you look at this, you've got three different PLCs and a VFD down there. So you're monitoring different parts of the final assembly.
Yeah, that's correct. So it's got AGVs and a conveyor. It's got multiple robotic arms that are doing different functions as the car goes down the final assembly line. And each of the three PLCs are designed to have unique functions that would be representative of what they would be in a typical automotive assembly line.
Yeah, now I got to put on my glasses because it's a little small. So if you're just listening, it's a compact Logix, a micro Logix, and a
micro
Logix. Oh, micro, what is that?
It's a micro 850.
And what is that? Is that just a smaller version of the micro Logix?
Yeah, I think they're the newer version of the micro Logix. So the micro Logix are a little older. The micro 850s they're real small, compact PLCs. So the goal there was to try to pick different versions of PLCs to different different traffic, different capabilities.
hmm And again, if you have any questions on the system, I'm sure Kyle will do his best to answer them, but we welcome those as well as any suggestions for vendors or problems. You just put those in the comments and Liz will put them up for us. So we've got that. Now, are the PLCs talking to each other at all?
They are. So the PLCs, we have some communications going between the PLCs as well as up to the operator workstation and the engineering workstation up in level 2, as you can see there. So there should be communications going back and forth most of the time.
And then the panel view, is that looking at all 4, or is that just assigned to one of those?
So that's a good question. I believe the way we have the panel view set up in the primary view, it's talking to 2 of the 3 PLCs and pulling data and showing values. And we'll also have the control panel with I/O down at the bottom. Also has some indicator lights and some buttons and switches on it as well that will work with all 3 PLCs and the VFD and motor too. So you'll have the HMI there plus the control panel.
And a little inside baseball here. Some of the applications we've gotten to be in the pavilion have been focused on, well, they don't list it as a problem, but they say the solution is microsegmentation. And we're actually struggling a little bit with this one, whether you do microsegmentation on this zone, because you pretty much have to allow SIP to talk everything to everything almost. And there might be a few minor restrictions, but not too much. Okay, so that's that zone. And then if we switch over to the paint shop, why don't you walk through the PLCs in the paint shop?
Yeah, so similar approach here. We wanted to pick another really common vendor that we see frequently. So we went with Siemens, and we have three different Siemens PLCs down in level 1 as well. Logo series, which is their really small compact PLC, and then 2 S7, a 1200 and a 1500, just to get, again, a little bit of variety in types of PLCs and functionality and capabilities. And then we've also got a couple of temperature and humidity sensors there too, just to represent and add some IIoT capabilities into the paint shop, things we see really frequently. Obviously, paint shops are very sensitive to temperature and humidity.
And will those feed into the Siemens, or do those go straight to the ignition?
They go straight up. They don't talk to the PLCs at all.
Okay. And I should say, this is one of the, we said there's 10% more that we might add to this. One of the things we're thinking about adding is, do we add a few more of those IIoT type devices? Do we add some Opto 22s or something else down at level 1? Talk a little bit about what's going on in level 0. So you've got the control panel with I/O. Are you simulating a line running, or how is that working?
Yeah, so the level 0 I/O is fairly basic in this demo. We're not actually building cars. So it's mostly just controlling indicator lights. So we've got indicator lights to show the different variables in the process, whether the conveyor is moving, whether it's active, whether there's a fault, those types of things. And then we've got buttons to provide input. So we have the ability to adjust the speed of the motor, be able to start and stop the process, and make some minor manipulations, either through buttons on the control panel or through the panel view HMI. So most of what we have in level 0 is fairly basic. It's indicator lights for outputs, buttons and switches for inputs. And then we do have the motor that'll be connected to the VFD as well. So we wanted to have something physical that was moving. We've got a general purpose motor that's connected to a small PowerFlex VFD.
Okay, and again, if you have a question, you don't have to wait. We'll answer it while it's on the screen, but we'll also answer them at the end. But feel free to just chime in if you have any questions on this. Now, one of the things, excuse me, that I liked about this was you had the 2 major vendors that we see manufacturing, Rockwell and Siemens, but then you've got ignition in there too, which I thought was really cool, in the sense that has a lot of partners. It's a little more open environment, and I think the mixture of the 2 is fine. But how can you explain kind of the interaction between the Rockwell Siemens and the ignition? What is Rockwell Siemens doing, and what is ignition doing in the system?
Yeah, good question. So we've got a couple different instances of ignition too. We're using it, and as we go up the architecture, you'll see we've got their MES and some other components. But at this level, we're primarily using it for the operator workstation. So it's going to be the primary HMI that we utilize that'll connect and communicate directly to the PLCs. And we chose ignition for a number of reasons, but one, they have very simple connectivity to both Rockwell and Siemens out of the box. So it provides an easy point of configuration for us to be able to pull all that data into one place, see it on the HMI. So at this level within the zone operator workstations, each one of those Windows devices will be running the ignition HMI software, and you'll be able to interact with and manipulate the process within that individual zone.
Okay, got it. And one of the things I like about this too is that you have the case where a lot of manufacturing plants have grown over time, so they might not just have one system. So if you're running a plant, you sometimes want that SCADA overlay on top of the actual, where the manufacturing is taking place. And I thought this was highly realistic. We did get a question, will the devices have the most up-to-date firmware, or will they be a bit older so that a few more issues will be discoverable? I'll start with this one, Kyle. We want to keep the proof of concept as realistic as possible. So that means everything's not probably going to be up to date. There's some superstars out there, but most companies are not perfect. So there's going to be some systems that will not be up to date. Also, when we give the proof of concept documentation package around November 1st, we will provide an asset inventory, but it's probably not going to be perfect. Just like our patching is not going to be perfect and our firmware is not going to be perfect. So we're going to try to mimic that. When Kyle and his team answer questions, we're going to kind of prepare for that, and we'll say, well, you're going to answer a lot of the questions, but let's think, would an asset owner normally be in a position to answer this question? So we're going to strive for realism. So the short answer to your question is yes, there will be some with a bit older firmware and some issues. Okay. Anything else you want to say about this zone? I guess we didn't talk about the switches. We are looking at whether we're going to use these switches or something else. That's something that could change. There could be a few more elements in here, but this is the basic design. Any other thoughts on this one, Kyle?
No, and I think just for the switches, we do have two fairly basic switches, but we did want managed switches at this level. That way it made it a little easier if we wanted to do anything with span ports or sessions or switch configurations, we could do that. And, 75-25, whether you see managed switches at this level in a real environment, but we figured we would go that route here. Similar with the switches and if you notice the Windows versions up top, I'll mention this just because the question on firmware versions, we also are trying to be representative of even Windows versions. So we have a couple Windows 11 PCs, a Windows 7, and even a good old Windows XP operator workstation.
And it's not included in here, but there's obviously other software running on those Windows. There's going to be some endpoint detection, EDR stuff on those systems, probably EDR management systems. So that information would be provided in the proof of concept package that the vendors would get. Again, our purpose here is not we've done detection challenges before, asset inventory challenges, where we've said, hey, we're giving you this blank slate. Tell us what's on our network. That's not really our approach here. Our approach here is more, we're a competent but not perfect manufacturing organization. We got a typo. That's probably not going to be the first or last. And luckily, this one wasn't on me. But see that, Kyle. we'll definitely fix that.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you. We will definitely get that one updated.
Okay. Well, we can jump back and forth as the questions come. Let's jump to the upper levels here. And to me, the realism was a big part of it. And then what got me more excited was that you had ignition involved, and that what finally sold me is you got an MES system here on level 3. because I don't think we talk enough about that in the OT security world. And that's such an important part of, well, of the more advanced manufacturing systems. I know some people are still operating off of spreadsheets and such, but the direction, the digitization of the future, you're going to have this MES, it's going to be working scheduling, workflow management, OEE, things like that. We actually have a manufacturing execution system here. Kyle, how do you use this system in this demo environment that you currently have? And we might treat that a little bit, but how are you currently using it in your demo environment?
Yeah, so we utilize it a lot. We move systems in and out quite frequently, security technologies, to be able to test it out and evaluate it. Our main lab, it's all connected to one big network, so we have the ability to tie in different demonstrations and different vignettes at any given time. So this is the one that's obviously representative of an automotive manufacturing line, so we use it primarily for our automotive clients, but not exclusively. And we utilize it to test all different types of technologies and capabilities. We even swapped out the switch just recently with one of our client switches so that we could test some containerized passive monitoring solutions on one of the switches. So lots of new capability development and testing, really.
Yeah, I really like the idea here that there's going to be some metrics there. Does anyone want to look at those metrics? There's going to be work orders coming in saying, you need to generate this much during this time period, and they're going to be tracking jobs. So I think that part of it is really cool. I don't know, beyond some micro segmentation, how much people actually do with that MES. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve security by leveraging some of the components that are in manufacturing at these higher levels. We also have a historian. I don't think we've decided whether it's PI or ignition at this point. Because you have both, is that correct?
Yeah, we've got them both in the lab, so we figured we'd see a little bit what different vendors we get and which integrations might apply before we made a final decision there. But either one is up, so certainly open to feedback from folks on the line too.
Yeah, and then that OPC Kepler server, you and I had a discussion about that, Kyle. I'm not sure what that really does. That we might pull that off if it doesn't have any purpose, but we're going to try to find some realistic purpose for that system.
Yeah, for sure. And one reason we had it in there initially is mostly it communicates directly to the PLCs as well, so it'll generate some additional traffic in the level 2 and below zones, and it'll also be able to collect and be a data point for potential tool vendors as well.
And I think one of the other things that and again, we will have this full information package for people involved beginning in November, but we're probably going to replace that 9200 switch with something a little more modern. And we had someone propose to replace this Hirschman switch with a Stratic switch. I'm kind of mixed on that because I don't know how many Stratic switches you would see down at that level, but perhaps. So we're playing around with some of the infrastructure more than anything else. I want to highlight on 3.5. You've got an MQTT server, so you can think of that broker maybe being involved in UNS or something like that.
And I did want to call out, Dale, that we spelled it right there. So,
will there be firewall or segmentation changes at all during the pavilion? Are they planned? A couple of thoughts there. One is, as you go up higher, you see there is a Palo Alto firewall. So this is in the traditional position that you'd see the OT/IT security perimeter placed. And again, we would be willing, I think as an asset owner, we would be willing to share the config with security providers that are looking to deal with traffic that's coming in, for people that want to understand flow patterns and things like that. So there is that firewall. We are looking, again, we're getting these problem statements in. We're getting a lot that are saying micro segmentation rather than rather than what problem they're solving. But we are looking to see whether we do some additional segmentation internally. And we're having some discussions on this. I mean, Kyle, let's just be real open on this. We're having discussions whether it makes the most sense in this switch in level 3, which is my opinion. But some people are thinking it makes more sense on these lower level switches. And we're still hashing through that. I don't think we've got a final decision. I guess in theory, you could do micro-segmentation in both of those. Mm-hmm. Where are you these days, Kyle? Where are you thinking?
Yeah, I would say most commonly we see it higher up the stack in a real world environment. It's just, there tends to be more macro or micro level segmentation in these small zones and more macro up above. So we might see folks that do zone to zone isolation. So in theory, the assembly line probably shouldn't be talking to the paint shop too often. So those type of segments and those type of micro segments, if you'd call them that, would be at that plant operation switch level in level 3.
Brian, let's bring Brian up here again. One of the things about the firewall and the segmentation, one of the challenges here is we don't want people installing necessarily, or we're going to look more carefully if someone says, I need to install a bunch of hardware on this system. Or I need to replace all these things in your system for a couple of reasons. One is that's a harder sell if you're doing a proof of concept, right? The bigger impact you make on their system, the less likely they're going to say yes. And the other thing is we also have to think about the other 7 participants. So we don't want to allow something that radically changes the environment for the other 7 participants. So we are trying to think through that. I know the 3 that we've accepted, this is not an issue, but we get into this micro segmentation. Like I think there was one solution provider who said yes, they'd replace all the switches, and that's kind of a no-go. It's not that they're wrong, but we're saying in this proof of concept, we as the asset owner wouldn't allow all the switches to be replaced.
Which obviously in a real world environment, that's no fun either, especially during a proof of concept. You gotta take production down to swap switches out. So.
Well, with a bit of concern about the rollback too, right? If you do it and it doesn't work, that's always a problem. Let's pull up this one, Matthew Paris. I'm not sure I understand what he means here. Does this make sense to you, Kyle?
Overlapping isolated segments. Oh yeah, we've definitely come across that before, especially with vendor systems that are hard coded with specific IPs, and you've got multiple zones of them, and they might have conflicting IP addresses on different subnets. So I don't know that we'll go that far in this one. I think we have them all in separate subnets at the moment, but open to feedback.
Well, I think that would be difficult because you really probably have to do it down here, right? You have to share addresses between the Siemens and the Rockwell is probably where you do that. So he's basically talking about IP address conflicts, right? That messes up your routing and switching. It's an interesting idea, Matthew. I doubt we'll do it, but we'll throw it in the hopper, see if one of the team has a good idea on something like that.
Yeah, and even just up above that, even overlapping subnets, sometimes they can confuse some of the tools. So it'd be an interesting game.
Well, which is, I think, what Matthew wanted to test. He's like, hey, let's give them this test of this terrible environment they walk into, where everything isn't done right. Okay, let's talk about Zone 3.5. So I mentioned you've got the MQTT server/broker up there. You got the Palo Alto firewall. Are we going to deploy that firewall with what we think is a good rule set?
So typically in our lab environment, we, I shouldn't say this, but we do what a lot of our clients do, and we have an any rule in there. But I think for this demo, our goal is we'll pull that any rule out. And we'll have some basic rule sets in there, but they likely will be fairly macro still.
Okay. Yeah. Since we're not testing a firewall, there's not, I doubt we'll have a firewall vendor in there, although when you start to get to the micro segmentation, maybe it's tomato. Yeah, I think we'll shoot for like a moderately effective rule base.
Yeah,
And
I
then
think
this,
especially 'cause-
go ahead.
and so especially because we're going to have a lot of different vendors in there setting things up, potentially overlapping too. We'll want to make sure that we have the ability to open up ports and traffic if we need to.
Mm-hmm. And then does this jump server do anything today?
So today, no, it's pretty much just a bare bones Windows machine. That's mostly if we do get any vendors that want to showcase, say, a remote access solution and we need a jump server or a file sharing solution. We have a drop point for those individual solutions to go on there that's in the DMZ that can pivot off that Palo Alto firewall.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then up at level 4, we've got users on the corporate network that might be remote accessing in for maintenance, might be looking at the MES, might be hitting the historian and such. So there's a variety of reasons they would get there. And what I didn't include, if I go back a couple of slides, you can see it at the very top. There's going to be an internet-based access as well. And there is the possibility of having one of the 8 participants doing something in the cloud, because there will be cloud access, and then they'll have to talk about how they secure that part of it as well. So it does go all the way up to there. Let's see. Any other comments you have on this? I guess we don't have Active Directory in this. Is that correct?
We do not, no.
So that might be a little bit unrealistic for some environments, but at this point, I wouldn't encourage adding it to it. I mean, it's a discussion we could have, but I don't know that it adds that much unless there was some provider or one of the participants that had an Active Directory solution.
Yeah, that's what I would probably say. If any of the tool providers, if they needed an Active Directory solution to make their solutions work more effectively, we could certainly put one in. But as of today, they'll all be localized accounts, mostly just for simplicity purposes.
Yeah. Let's see, are you specifying the deployment environments for the prospective vendors to level the playing field? Windows, Linux, VMware, don't care. Well, if they're going to deploy something on one of the systems that exists, they'll have to live with that, what the system is. If they are deploying an additional box on the network, and again, we have to make sure when we say, yes, you can do this, that it's not a box that's going to render the other 7 with a impossible or very different solution. They can't walk in saying, we expect this, and they show up and it's completely different. Although that might be more accurate for a proof of concept for those that you have done that. There's always surprises. So I would say the answer to that is don't care if it's a third-party box. What's your feeling, Kyle?
Yeah, I agree, and I agree too. We're not gonna change any of the operating systems on any of the devices we already have within the network, because that's probably unrealistic for a POC. But
yeah,
physically in the environment, each of these will be on separate skids. They'll have DIN rails, so we'll have space if people want to bring their own components to mount side by side with some of the devices. And we'll also have a half server rack. So if folks want to bring their own hardware to put in the server rack to their own physical or virtualized machines, that's fine too.
Okay, and we're going to go for about another 10 minutes, but this is the time if you have any questions. So if you have a problem you want to see solved live in the live demo at the pavilion, if you want to see a specific vendor in the pavilion, I'd be very curious about that. If you have a question about this system that we've been going over, if you have a suggestion of something we should add to the system, I'd like to see that as well. And of course, if you don't have a chance to put it in here, you can also send anything to info@s4xevents.com. We'll take any of that input. Marco says, I would keep the OPC server in the architecture. I think Kyle and I are both inclined to agree with you on that, right? Because it's such a common component. So I'm with you on that, Marco. That the challenge I have here is, what is it doing? Because we're using Ignition for so much, we need to figure out who is querying that OPC server, or where is that OPC server sending its information. We've got the historical data in the historian. We've got Ignition with a lot of the data. We've got the UNS. So we need to think of some reason, some kind of user, or I can't think of the right word I'm thinking of here, but some reason why the OPC server exists. But I'm inclined to agree with you. And Kyle, we might need to get the team, especially the automotive experts, to think a little bit about why you might have that odd duck in there in the system.
Yeah, definitely. And we can even, I think we even talked about maybe calling it a legacy component and having maybe one of the users have an automated script to query that regularly, as if it was something that might have been in place a while ago that an older application might still use.
Okay, great question from Eric Smith. He's confused how this is different than the earlier detection challenges. In the early detection challenges, people were not told anything about the network. So the idea was really a detection challenge. Can you detect what's on my network with no information? We essentially just sent them streams of PCAPs that we had collected from a third party, from an actual site. So it was real world data, but it was, it was kind of like a blind challenge. And they didn't have to demo anything. What this is where, again, we're trying to mimic a POC as closely as possible. So we're saying, hey, you don't do a POC unless it's going to solve a problem for you. So we're asking the participants, hey, what problem are you going to solve? Okay, that's the problem we want solved. Then second question that I haven't mentioned is, how do we, or what's the criteria to know if your solution is a success? We have a problem. You say, hey, we've got the solution. We'll come in and it'll do this and this and this for you, and this is how you'll know it works. Then they have, it's about a 4-month period, just a little less than 4 months, where they get the information package. They work with the team just like you would previously to going in and doing a proof of concept in a manufacturing facility. And then they come down. They have about a day and a half to install it. And then they have to do a live demo of the system. So detection challenges weren't doing any live demos, weren't working on a real system. They were just dealing with PCAPs. This is a real working system, and they're going to have to demo it in 2 ways. First of all, they'll demo it on stage. So we'll have a small stage in the POC Pavilion. Person will walk up, they'll have a half hour to explain what they're doing to demo it. Then someone from the S4 team will question them for 15 minutes. For example, if they say they're doing remote access, I might say, well, show me that I can not change this setting on this PLC and actually go and see them do that. Okay, now show that this person can do it. Show me how I would add a new user. So actually go through some of the things. And then in addition to doing it there, then they'll have this in their exhibit area for the full 3 days. So you can, as an S4 attendee, you can go up and say, okay, show it to me live. It's actually working. And if you have any questions, you can go out to Kyle and his team and say, hey, did you see this? Is this how your system works? Is this user a legitimate user? So you'll actually be able to see this. And so in short, we are trying to mimic as close as we can a proof of concept. So you as an attendee can see this system actually working on a real system without having to do the proof of concept yourself, or at least narrowing down the ones that you might want to see.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Dale, I love this too, because it also, the vendors are having to install this. And you mentioned about a day and a half to get this up and running, which isn't too unrealistic from a typical proof of concept. So it really kind of puts us all on a bit of a time crunch to get the tool deployed, we understand what the impact is to the production environment. If we have to swap out a switch, how much downtime is that going to take? Like it really has us understand from start to finish what the impact of the POC is from deployment all the way through the operationalization in the demo.
And if you watch the previous video, you'll know that I was a little frustrated with the vulnerability management pavilion we've had and some of the other pavilions that they just really weren't implemented as we had hoped. And I was about to give up, and then I saw the Prove It conference. I saw what they did, and they took this, and theirs is like 10x as complicated as this. But they actually did something like this where they said, here's a system, you have to show your system working on it in front of a live audience and demo it. And so I decided, well, we're not going to do it as big as they did it, but we will try it small with a real system and 8 vendors. And I think a real key was getting the system and team from Booz Allen on board, Kyle. We wouldn't have launched it until we saw that we could get someone like this to actually work it with us. So, thank you very much for Booz Allen stepping up and doing this.
Yeah, of course. Like I said, we love building these things. We have a team that's really passionate about building these to mimic a customer's environment and make them as realistic as possible. Even though obviously the scale is small, we're not going to take over the whole room, but we love the idea to be able to build this out and the mission of really testing it all out.
Yeah, and then Eric Smith has kind of a good follow-up question. I'm going to summarize it here, but what? And I don't think we've really got an answer on this yet, but the amount of change that's going to happen to the system over the 3 days. Now, certainly we'll be getting new production orders in, right? That's highly realistic. We'll be measuring how we're doing in production. I don't know that we're necessarily going to introduce security issues, but it might be interesting to have the plant not be operating as effectively, or part of the plant going down for some reason, or something like that. I don't think we've really gotten that far, Eric, to figure out how many changes we're making over the 3 days. Kyle, have you played around with that in your mind at all?
Yeah, I would say a lot of times when we do things like this, we will have a list of kind of test scripts that we can run if needed. And I think depending on the tool vendors that are selected, especially if we want to really be able to test out microsegmentation tools capability to block malicious traffic, is no easier way to test that than to introduce some irregular traffic. So I think we'll probably have some test scripts at the ready to be able to introduce things like that. Hopefully we don't have any real plant downtime, but we'll see. That might be a real time thing if something goes down. But
well, yeah. But you might have, for example, if you're going to change a line from one model car to another model car, the line might be down during a line change. And
yeah.
And so we might mimic some of those sorts of things. Let me put one up here, Liz. Will there be any offensive activity during the demos? Perhaps. Kyle mentioned something, but that's not really the focus here. So I would say the pure detection tools, a number of these tools do more than detection. They do asset inventory, vulnerability management, and risk, and things of that. Those tools will be there, but the ones that are actually saying, I was able to capture these attacks, like we did in the detection challenge, we're not going to be launching a bunch of attacks on this to test out the capabilities of detection products. Not that that's not valid, but that's not something we're tackling in the pavilion this year or next year. Let's throw Chris Grove's question up here. He's talking about, this looks like, I shouldn't read silently to myself, that's not a good video. This looks like assets an organization knows about and thinks are in production, add at least 25% more assets, 10 extra networks, all undocumented, all misconfigured, and none on the diagram to better simulate the real world. Maybe add in a ton of legacy stuff, Windows 2000, etc. too. Chris, I agree and disagree with you on this. I think you're right in terms of the percentages and what you run into in the real world. But in this proof of concept, we're talking about, again, I'm going to take that down. We're talking about a relatively small system. Go back to line 2. We're talking about 2 lines, six PLCs, maybe we'll have 5 to 10 IoT devices, a couple of HMIs. So it's not a huge system. So it's going to be tough for us to implement all the variety that you talked about in there. That I think you're accurate. That's what's going on overall in this automobile manufacturing plant. But on these lines, it's not there. And I'd also say that for proof of concept, sometimes you get the better lines. You don't get the ones that are like super fragile and about to tip over if you do anything bad. You get ones, hey, we think we know this line, we think it's under control, we're going to let you play around on this line. So, yes, you're right that it's a realistic environment, but I don't think, quite honestly, we're going to be able to get that level of reality on the whole system. It will be more POC reality. Liz, were there any other questions, or did we get them all? No other questions? Okay. Again, if you have any other questions or comments, you can send them to us at info@s4xevents.com. We probably will be putting out something again in the August, September timeframe once we get, I think that we have a date in September where all the vendors and all the problems have to be identified. So we'll put out something then that'll say, this is what's actually going to be, these are the 8 that are going to be in the pavilion. I got to tell you, I'm really excited about the first 3. I think they're really good. Let me throw one more thing out. We've had a number of applications. So if you apply and we've said, hold on, we wanted to get to this point till we got really serious. The 3 that we've said yes to were ones that we actually wanted there. They were no-brainers. We wanted them in. We've got a number of others that have submitted that we're going to now look at closer, and now we can share this with them and have a deeper conversation and try to pick the remaining 5. There are a few solutions that just don't really fit. The detection solution was a good example. We're not going to test your ability to detect attack. So why have them in the pavilion? It's really not going to do much for pure detection. Now, if you also do asset inventory and vulnerability management and such, you might be in there. We had a really interesting application related to cyber risk quantification, CRQ, but they required a ton of information about the business. Like what was the annual loss exposure for each one of the lines, and we're not planning on creating all that business information. So there's a few really interesting solutions that aren't going to be included, mainly because we don't think we'll be able to give them an actual test to demo in the POC. But I would say if you have any interest in it, this week and next week are the time to submit, because after that, the other 5 spots will probably be selected. So I'd encourage you to do that. You can go to the S4 site and get more information, DM me on LinkedIn, send an email, whatever you want to do to get in touch. But don't wait longer than 2 weeks if you're serious about wanting to do this. I think with that, Kyle, I think we'll close it, but I'll give you a chance. Any last words about the architecture, the system?
I think we covered most of it. As I mentioned, for the next time we do one of these, happy to show you kind of a physical construct of it as well. These are going to be on two separate skids with all the components accessible for the tool vendors as well as attendees that just want to come up and touch a button or manipulate the process at all. So we'll have that plus the half server rack there on site to be able to demo any of the physical components of it too. Other than that, just we're really excited and certainly open to any suggestions that folks have. It's a pretty flexible architecture, very simple, but flexible. So the goal is if anybody has ideas on how we can make it more interesting for any of the vendors or for attendees, definitely let us know.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I'm going to close it here. Kyle, thank you very much, and look forward to continuing to work with you and the team on this project. I'm really excited about this.
Of course. You too. Thanks, Dale.
Okay, bye, everyone.